Hey, welcome to the channel. If this is your first visit, I'd love for you to subscribe and share the video. It really helps a lot. And let me know, where are you watching from? Let's jump in. Max Connor checked the time on the dashboard as he drove steadily toward the house that once felt like his sanctuary. Deep down, he already knew what awaited him there. The evidence had been too glaring to dismiss. Still, a part of him clung to the faint, irrational hope that he'd somehow misunderstood. A last-minute cancellation of a business trip had left his evening free, offering the perfect, and perhaps final, chance to confront what he had long suspected but tried not to face. When he pulled to a quiet stop outside the house, his eyes were immediately drawn to a sleek, unfamiliar sports car in the driveway. There was no mistaking it. It matched the one in the photos he'd received earlier in the week. That raw ache of betrayal surged up again, heavy in his chest, making it hard to breathe. He took a long breath, steeling himself before getting out, determined to control the emotions that threatened to surface. He reminded himself to stay calm, to move with purpose, to show no trace of weakness or indecision. His mind was already made up. Nothing Julia said now would change that. With careful, measured steps, he entered the house. From down the hallway, he could hear voices coming from the dining room. Soft, easy laughter exchanged in private tones that only lovers share when they think they're alone. Each footstep brought a quicker pulse, a sharper clarity. He paused at the edge of the doorway, letting the sound of her voice, familiar, tender, unmistakably intimate, hit him like a quiet blow. That warmth she once reserved for him now belonged to someone else. The other voice belonged to Blake Cooper, an ambitious attorney who worked with Julia at her family's law firm. Max stepped into the room without a word. The air shifted instantly. Julia turned in shock, her face losing color, while Blake sat frozen, panic spreading across his features. "Max, I thought you were gone until Thursday," Julia said, her voice trembling as she scrambled for an explanation. Max stared at her, unmoved, letting her falter beneath the weight of her own guilt. He didn't look at Blake, who remained seated, stricken and silent. "Julia," Max said quietly, his tone icy, "are we still pretending tonight?" He reached into his jacket with a controlled motion and pulled out his phone. On its screen were the photos, the irrefutable proof collected by a private investigator. The images laid bare every secret, every lie. He handed the phone to her wordlessly. She took it with shaking hands, and her breath hitched as she saw the evidence for herself. Her face flushed with shame. The mask fell. No excuse came. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she struggled to find something, anything, that might explain the unexplainable. Blake shifted in his chair and mumbled an apology, but Max silenced him with a raised hand. This wasn't Blake's confrontation, not tonight. Looking Julia dead in the eyes, Max spoke with a clarity that cut through the silence. "This ends here. No more lies. No more pretending there's a path forward." Blake stood abruptly, murmured a few words that neither of them registered, and left the room with his head down, too ashamed to meet Max's eyes. Max didn't watch him go. His attention never left Julia. She didn't follow Blake. She didn't move. There was nothing left to say. And in the stillness that followed, it was painfully clear. Her place in that home had ended. Hours later, with a single suitcase in hand, she slipped quietly out the door. Max stood nearby as she passed, but said nothing. In the days that followed, Max kept his silence. He remained focused and distant, unreachable. Julia called endlessly, left message after message, all ignored. The silence was deliberate, and it deepened with time. Behind the scenes, Max moved quickly, meeting with attorneys and putting into motion the quiet dismantling of a marriage that had spanned nearly 30 years. Eventually, Julia received a short message from him. It was cold and formal. He said they needed to talk, but only over video. There was no misunderstanding his tone. This was no olive branch. When she joined the video call at the agreed time, Anxiety churned in her gut. A small, misguided hope flickered inside her. Maybe she could change his mind. But when the screen came to life, that hope was crushed instantly. Max was not alone. Seated beside him were two highly regarded divorce attorneys, both known for handling complex, high-profile separations with clinical precision. Julia was just opening her mouth to speak when another window blinked to life in the video call. Blake Cooper's face appeared, pale and visibly rattled, avoiding eye contact with her completely. Before the tension could settle, Max stepped in and took over. His voice carried a stern authority she had never heard from him before. Gone was the gentle, measured tone she once knew. In its place was something steady, sharp, and meticulously rehearsed. He brought up a digital folder filled with organized documents, zeroing in on particular clauses from the prenuptial agreement they had both signed years earlier. Julia's heart dropped as she listened. This wasn't a bluff. Max was executing something long in the making, triggered the day he discovered her relationship with Blake. He methodically went through each stipulation, spelling out how the agreement entitled him to most of their shared property. The house, their investments, and most jarringly, the majority stake in the family company, where Julia still held an executive role. Her chest tightened with panic. The foundation of her life was crumbling in real time, and there was no stopping it. In a desperate attempt to change the course, Julia tried reasoning with them. She protested, pleaded, but the lawyers on the call were unmoved. They responded in a flat, legal cadence, brushing her off without emotion. Then Max delivered the final, crushing announcement. Julia was being removed from her executive role, effective immediately. Any company assets in her possession were to be returned at once. In that moment, she saw clearly. His silence hadn't been submission. It had been preparation. This wasn't a fight. It was a calculated unraveling of everything she thought was secure. Quiet tears streaked down her face as she sat frozen, forced to witness the destruction of the life she had built. Max presented signed documents, each already finalized that very morning. The outcome had been sealed before she had even logged into the meeting. And then Max turned to Blake. Blake hadn't spoken once, sitting stiffly as the meeting unfolded. Now, Max addressed him directly, his words precise and restrained. He questioned Blake's judgment, highlighting the professional standards he'd broken. Blake tried to speak up, calling his behavior a one-time failure that didn't define him. Max didn't even blink. With chilling composure, Max revealed he had known everything: the rendezvous, the messages, the betrayals. Julia felt her stomach drop further. Max had been watching it all unfold, far more aware than either of them had realized. Not once did he raise his voice. Every line was delivered with calm finality. For the first time, Julia saw him not as the man she had once married, but as a powerful, calculating figure she had foolishly underestimated. The call ended abruptly, without space for argument. The screen went black. Julia sat motionless, drowned in the silence. Every step that led her here echoed in her mind, every choice now painfully irreversible. In the days that followed, Max wasn't finished. He had one more move to make, one aimed directly at Blake. Intent on dismantling any illusion Julia may have had about him, Max orchestrated another meeting. Blake received a curt email that morning, calling him to a video call later that same day. Despite the dread clawing at him, Blake knew he couldn't avoid it. When he joined, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Max was already there, eyes locked on him, calm but unforgiving. Then Blake noticed a third participant, Rachel Cooper, his wife, a prominent physician known in their community for her integrity and warmth. Rachel met his eyes with a quiet sadness that told him everything. She knew, more than he had hoped to conceal. His hands trembled under the desk as he struggled to keep control. Max, speaking in the same unnervingly calm voice, turned to Rachel and revealed the full extent of Blake's deceit. It hadn't just been Julia. He had betrayed multiple people, across years, with chilling consistency. One by one, the screens displayed texts, images, timestamps, irrefutable evidence of affair after affair, colleagues, neighbors, women from around town. Each new revelation deepened the gravity of what Blake had done. Rachel listened without interruption, her face composed, though the hurt in her eyes was unmistakable. Blake tried to intervene, stammering that these were past mistakes, isolated lapses. He swore they didn't reflect who he was now, but Max had anticipated every excuse. With each denial, he presented fresh proof that Blake's betrayals were recent, not buried in the past. Any hope of escape collapsed under the mounting evidence. Then Rachel quietly raised a hand. She asked for a moment. Turning to Blake, her expression was resolute. Her voice didn't waver as she informed him that she had already filed for divorce. There was sorrow in her tone, but also a firmness that left no room for appeal. She told him she no longer recognized the man she had married, the one she had built a life with. The man she thought she knew simply didn't exist. Blake's face flushed red with shame, every word landing like a hammer. There was nothing left to defend. He was hit with a brutal epiphany. The carefully constructed identity he had clung to for years was now in ruins, obliterated by Max's revelations. Across from him, Max remained silent as Rachel spoke with calm precision, presenting her own damning evidence against Blake. Her tone was unwavering, final. Redemption was not on the table. Neither Rachel nor Max noticed that Julia had quietly joined the call. Her camera off, microphone muted, she remained unseen, a silent witness to everything unfolding. Hidden from view, she watched the truth unravel with growing horror. A deep sense of disgrace engulfed her as she realized just how far Blake's deception had gone. She had meant nothing to him, simply another target in his long pattern of emotional manipulation. She had once believed what they shared was authentic. Now she saw it for what it was, a cruel illusion. As Blake flailed under the weight of Rachel's words, he tried a final desperate appeal. He mentioned their young daughters, grasping for sympathy, hoping to soften Rachel's resolve. But she stood firm. Her voice held no tremor, no second thought. She told him plainly, their daughters deserved a life untainted by a father who had failed them so completely. The statement landed with a devastating finality. With that, she ended the call. The screen cut to black, leaving Blake to face Max alone. Max finally broke his silence. His words were clipped and pointed. He spelled out the damage Blake had done, not just the collapse of two families, but the risk he'd brought upon the company. There would be no shielding from the consequences. Legal action was imminent, and there would be no way to avoid it. When Max left the call, Blake sat motionless, staring at his own shadowy reflection on the blank screen, overtaken by the full weight of his reckless actions. In the days that followed, Julia isolated herself completely. Time dragged forward in a haze of shame and solitude. She reached out repeatedly to her daughter, Lily, her only remaining hope for comfort, but each call ended the same, unanswered. Voicemail. She was adrift, cut off from everyone she'd once counted on. Family, friends, even former co-workers who had once made up the rhythm of her daily life. The silence around her became a form of punishment, an echo of all she had lost. Then, unexpectedly, a message from Max appeared. He invited her to join one last video meeting. The word last ignited both fear and hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to explain, to ask for understanding. She quickly accepted, but when the screen lit up, it wasn't Max who appeared. It was Lily. Her face was tight with pain, her eyes distant. The warmth Julia remembered was gone. Julia managed a fragile smile, though she could already sense the futility. Her voice broke as she tried to speak of regret, of longing, of love, but Lily cut her off almost immediately. Her words were steady, cold. She laid bare the depth of her hurt, not just for what Julia had done to Max, but for how she had betrayed her daughter. Every sentence landed like a blow. Then came something even harder to hear. Lily was expecting. There would be a celebration. Julia hadn't been told. She hadn't been invited. Her absence was no accident. It was a deliberate message. As Lily spoke, silent tears slid down Julia's cheeks. Her daughter had made it clear there was no place for her in this new chapter. Whatever connection had once existed between them was gone. The pain cut deeper than anything Julia had known. This wasn't just about disgrace or a failed romance. She had lost her daughter's faith, the bond that mattered most. She begged again, reaching out in desperation, but Lily didn't budge. With calm conviction, Lily explained that the values she had grown up with, truth, loyalty, love, had all crumbled when she saw what her mother had done. Julia hadn't just betrayed Max. She had betrayed the very ideals Lily had built her life upon. When the call ended, Lily's goodbye was final, a wish for peace that came with distance, far from Julia, far from the life she was now building. Julia sat frozen long after the call ended, staring into the void of her screen. Hours later, another message arrived, this one from Max. It was short and unequivocal. She would never again be welcome in the family home. And just like that, the truth settled in. She hadn't just lost a partner. She had lost everything. Her family, her identity, her place in the world. Alone in the unfamiliar apartment she now called home, Julia finally confronted the full weight of what she'd done. This hadn't been a lapse in judgment or a single error. It had been a choice with irreversible consequences. It had cost her the man she had once loved, but more tragically, it had severed the most sacred bond of all, her connection with her daughter, who now saw her only as a stranger. In the days after that final conversation, Max came to a decision no one expected. The emotional toll of what had happened had forced him to reconsider what truly mattered. Though he had finalized every legal detail and financial arrangement, the emotional scars remained, and healing required more than closure on paper. He organized a private video conference with a carefully chosen group. There was no agenda, no context, only an invitation. Among those present were a few senior staff members, his attorneys, and Lily, still visibly carrying the weight of what they had all endured. Julia's name was not on the list. Max had made a clear choice. She would not be part of whatever came next. This would be a fresh beginning, and she had no place in it. With a steadiness in his voice that caught everyone off guard, Max delivered a revelation no one in the room had anticipated. He was stepping away from the family enterprise, relinquishing the role he had upheld with honor for so many years. A stunned hush descended on the gathering. All eyes turned toward him, wide with astonishment and disbelief. Max paused, drawing in a deliberate breath before elaborating. Though the business had once defined him, his priorities had shifted. He now felt an undeniable pull toward something more personal, a life centered on his family and a calling that resonated more deeply. He turned to Lily with a heartfelt gaze and gently affirmed that she was the one he trusted to lead the company into its future. Lily sat frozen in disbelief, momentarily unable to find her voice. But as the weight of her father's words settled over her, she began to comprehend the gravity of what he was entrusting her with. This wasn't a mere change in leadership. It was something far more intimate, the passing on of a legacy steeped in values like honesty, kindness, and integrity, values that had been strained amid recent turmoil. Overcome with emotion, Lily accepted the mantle, promising to carry forward the ideals her father had taught her since childhood. Then, with quiet resolve, Max disclosed a long-held aspiration, a dream that had been quietly maturing within him for many years. He announced his intention to commit nearly his entire personal wealth to establishing a humanitarian project focused on supporting individuals facing betrayal and familial trauma. This initiative would provide therapeutic counseling, financial resources, and emotional guidance to those navigating crisis. The motivation he shared stemmed from his own painful past. Rather than letting that pain define or embitter him, he had chosen to transform it, to use his story as a source of hope and renewal for others who felt alone in their suffering. His declaration stirred something deep in everyone present, leaving them visibly moved by the depth of his purpose and the bravery it took to pursue it. In that instant, Lily understood with absolute clarity. Her father had opted for a nobler course, one rooted not in vengeance, but in compassion. In the face of betrayal, he had embraced empathy. His decision was not just about change, but about redemption, a clear message that even the deepest wounds could bloom into something healing. Max ended the meeting with calm finality, assuring everyone that his choice was irrevocable and that every legal detail had already been arranged to ensure Lily's smooth succession. He sought no applause or external approval. His peace stemmed from knowing he was living in alignment with his convictions. Life had tested him severely, and this, giving to others, lifting the broken, was his answer. It was his declaration of forgiveness, of enduring strength, and of hope that refused to fade. In the days that followed, as news of Max's decision circulated through the community, Julia finally learned of his departure from the company and the cause he had embraced. She was rendered speechless. Only then did the truth begin to dawn on her. She had deeply misunderstood the man she had spent nearly 3 decades with. She realized she had let slip away her chance to be part of something truly meaningful, something capable of changing lives. Meanwhile, Max threw himself wholeheartedly into making his vision a reality. Every step in building the support center reignited a spark within him, a vitality he hadn't known in years. With each accomplishment, he felt increasingly aligned with his true purpose, one far greater than wealth, status, or recognition could ever offer. Though he accepted that some emotional wounds might never fully close, he found healing in turning his pain into a refuge for others, creating a path forward not just for them, but for himself as well. And thus, Max began anew. He didn't just walk away from a broken marriage. He left behind the bitterness that could have consumed him. Instead, he rose with quiet dignity, choosing to let his sorrow light the way for others, to help them rebuild, to believe again, and to discover strength even in their darkest moments.